The evening light filtered through the tall windows of the apartment building, casting long shadows across the polished floors. David Martinez stood in his doorway, adjusting the small handwritten sign that read, "Room for rent, one more time." His calloused hands, marked by years of construction work, smoothed the edges of the paper with careful precision. At 34. David had learned that life rarely went according to plan. The divorce papers had been finalized 6 months ago, leaving him with full custody of his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, and a mortgage payment that seemed to grow heavier each month. The spare bedroom in their 2-bedroom apartment had become a necessity rather than a luxury. He glanced back toward the living room, where Emma sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her dark curls bouncing as she worked on her homework. The soft scratch of her pencil against paper was the only sound in the quiet apartment. David's chest tightened with the familiar weight of responsibility. Every decision he made now had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes when you were the only parent left standing. The doorbell rang, its gentle chime cutting through the evening stillness. David straightened his shoulders and opened the door to find a young woman standing in the hallway. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long blonde hair that caught the light from the corridor fixtures. She wore a simple red dress that seemed expensive, though David couldn't quite say why. Perhaps it was the way the fabric fell, or how perfectly it fit her frame. "Hi," she said, her voice soft and somewhat hesitant. "I'm Sarah. I called earlier about the room." David nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. "Yes, of course. Come in, please." Sarah walked into the apartment with measured steps, her eyes taking in every detail. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the nervous way she clutched a small leather purse. David noticed she had a backpack slung over one shoulder, the kind college students typically carried. "So you're a student at the university?" David asked, closing the door behind her. "Yes, I'm studying business," Sarah replied, her gaze drifting toward Emma, who had looked up from her homework with curious brown eyes. "And you have a daughter?" "Emma," David said, pride evident in his voice. "She's 8. Very well behaved, I promise. She won't be any trouble." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since arriving, her expression seemed genuinely warm. "She's beautiful. I don't mind children at all." Emma waved shyly from her spot on the floor before returning to her schoolwork. David felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Finding a roommate who was comfortable around children had been one of his biggest concerns. "Let me show you the room," David said. Leading Sarah down a short hallway, the spare bedroom was small but clean, with a single window that faced east toward the morning sun. David had painted the walls a neutral beige and furnished it with a simple bed, a desk, and a small dresser he'd found at a thrift store. It wasn't much, but it was honest and functional. "The rent is $400 a month," David explained, watching Sarah's face for any sign of disappointment. "That includes utilities and internet. There's a shared bathroom down the hall, and you're welcome to use the kitchen whenever you need to." Sarah nodded slowly, running her fingers along the surface of the desk. "It's perfect," she said quietly. David blinked, surprised by her quick acceptance. Most people who responded to his ad wanted to negotiate the price or ask for additional amenities. "Are you sure? You don't want to think about it overnight?" "No, I'm sure," Sarah said, turning to face him. "When can I move in?" "Tomorrow, if you'd like. I just need first month's rent and a small security deposit." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, thick with cash. "Will this cover it?" David's eyebrows rose as he counted the bills. There was easily 2 months' rent plus deposit, all in crisp $100 bills. "This is too much," he said, trying to hand some of it back. "Keep it," Sarah said, waving her hand dismissively. "Consider it payment for the next 2 months. I prefer to pay in advance." Something about the casual way she handled such a large amount of cash struck David as unusual, but he didn't want to pry. Maybe she had a good job, or perhaps her parents helped with expenses. Either way, the money would help him sleep better. At night, knowing the mortgage payment was covered over the following weeks, Sarah settled into the apartment with remarkable ease. She was quiet and respectful, always cleaning up after herself in the kitchen and bathroom. She helped Emma with her math homework in the evenings, patiently explaining fractions and multiplication tables while David prepared dinner. What puzzled David, however, were the small inconsistencies he began to notice. Sarah claimed to be a struggling college student, but her clothes were clearly expensive. She carried the latest model smartphone and wore a watch that looked like it cost more than David made in a month. When she thought no one was looking, she would check her phone and frown at messages that seemed to cause her stress. One evening, while Sarah was helping Emma with a science project at the kitchen table, David overheard part of a phone conversation she was having in her room. Her voice carried through the thin walls, though she was clearly trying to keep it quiet. "I can't come home yet, Father," she was saying. "I need more time." "No, I understand the expectations, but this is important. To me, I'm learning things here that I could never learn in a boardroom." David tried not to listen, but the conversation continued for several more minutes, with Sarah's voice growing increasingly firm. When she emerged from her room later that evening, her eyes were slightly red, as if she had been crying. "Everything okay?" David asked gently. Sarah nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Just family stuff. You know how it is?" But David didn't know how it was. His own family had been working class for generations. His parents had struggled to make ends meet, just as he was struggling now. Sarah's problems seemed to come from an entirely different world. The truth revealed itself on a rainy Thursday evening in November. David was washing dishes when he heard Emma squeal with delight from the living room. He dried his hands and walked over to find his daughter pointing excitedly at the television screen. "Daddy, look, it's Sarah." David's eyes followed Emma's pointing finger to see Sarah's photograph on the evening news. She was wearing an elegant black dress and standing next to an older man in an expensive suit. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Billionaire tech mogul Richard Whitman's daughter, Sarah Whitman, has been missing from the family estate for over 2 months. Sources close to the family say she disappeared after a heated argument about her future role in the Whitman technology empire. David stared at the screen in shock. The woman he knew as a struggling college student was actually the daughter of one of the country's wealthiest men. He turned toward the hallway, where Sarah stood frozen in the doorway of her room, her face pale with a mixture of fear and resignation. "I can explain," she said softly. Emma looked back and forth between them, confusion written across her young face. David gently placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "Emma, why don't you go brush your teeth and get ready for bed?" he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind after Emma disappeared down the hallway. David and Sarah sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "My name really is Sarah," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I really am 22, but everything else ... I haven't been honest with you." David folded his hands on the table, waiting for her to continue. "I left home because my father wanted to force me into the family business. He had my entire life planned out, which schools to attend, which people to marry, which charities to support. I felt like I was suffocating." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to know what it was like to be normal. To live in the real world with real people facing real problems." "And you chose my apartment for this experiment?" David asked, trying to keep any bitterness out of his voice. "It wasn't an experiment," Sarah said quickly. "At first, maybe, but not after I got to know you and Emma. You've been more of a family to me in 2 months than my own father has been in years." David studied her face, searching for signs of deception but finding only genuine emotion. "Your father must be worried sick. He's worried about the family reputation and the company stock price," Sarah replied with a bitter laugh. "He's probably more concerned about the media attention than about my safety." They sat in silence for several more minutes. David thought about all the evenings Sarah had spent helping Emma with homework, the way she laughed at his daughter's silly jokes, and how she always insisted on helping with the dishes despite his protests. Whatever her reasons for being there, her care for his family had been real. "What happens now?" David asked finally. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I suppose I have to go home, face the music." Take my place in the empire. Is that what you want? It's what's expected of me. David leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. You know, Emma asked me something the other day. She wanted to know why some people do jobs they hate just because other people tell them to. Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the conversation began. I told her that sometimes adults make choices based on fear instead of love, David continued. Fear of this.